I'm very mindful that this episode today might end up being a bit of a ramble. So I'm just giving you a heads up in case you're looking for well structured thoughts that have been really carefully placed next to other well structured thoughts. That might not be what happens today, but there's some stuff that I would like to explore with you. And it's all around this idea of being too much. Now, I wasn't really sure if this was the thing I was going to talk about today, but I've come across some notes that I made a little while ago about this whole idea of being too much, and it really resonated with something that I noticed this morning after I got dressed, that I am wearing, quite frankly, a slightly bizarre outfit. It's an ankle length orange dress that makes me look like something out of Star Trek, a pink bobbled hat, a pair of trousers underneath the dress because I got a little bit chilly, some men's socks, and a pair of very attractive gardening slippers. And in the past, I think I would have A, not worn it, B, not wanted anyone to see me wearing it, and C, if I had worn it, I think I might have accused myself of being a bit too much. I'd have consciously toned it down in some way. And I say all that very aware that there are wonderful people listening here who've known me for a very long time and who might actually be laughing at the moment knowing some of the outfits that I've worn in the past. And how I can willingly be a lot at times. But I feel as though we often pay a lot of attention to the feeling of being not enough. You've only got to scroll through Instagram or Facebook or, anywhere where people share reflections on self-awareness. And often there is a very strong focus, like I said, on this sense of not enoughness. And for so many of us, that feeling of not being enough is extremely strong. It comes from stories that we carry from childhood. It comes from maybe our position within the family unit. It comes from school. It comes from wherever. It might even be legacy stuff that we're carrying, ancestral stories that we're carrying. It can often be to do with our culture, our gender, the society that we were born into and how they responded to us and the people that we have been born from. Now, all of that is incredibly important. It's really valuable work to really understand what can sit beneath this sense of not enoughness. And my reflection is that very often it can lead to us having a sense of unworthiness, maybe leading into imposter syndrome and a sense that we don't really belong. Now, so all of that is true. And then there's this thing about what happens if you feel like you're too much. So when I first started doing this kind of work on myself and first started exploring that sense of kind of waking up to myself, to my life experience, to what was going on inside of me and how I was responding to the world outside of me, I noticed that people would often talk, often particularly if there were like groups of women, say on retreat or something like that, that there would often be a lot of talk about not enoughness. And I would sit there and initially would feel a bit separate from the group, because most of my life I felt like I'm too much. And I've had that experience where I've walked into a room and I've just felt like I've taken up too much space. Like there just isn't enough room in the room to accommodate me. And it's not just a kind of physical thing, although that was part of it, and I think often can be part of this sense of too muchness. But it was like an energetic thing. So I'd get a bit clumsy. I don't know, I might kind of knock something off a wall or I remember we went and looked around a house once, which subsequently found out some really dear friends of ours bought. And Anton and I were going around the house, and both of us just felt like giants, that we were just too much in that space. And I've had that experience, that was a very kind of physically graphic sense of that experience, but I've had that experience in other places. And when I started to share this, big surprise, spoiler alert, other people have felt the same way. Gosh, who would have thought? So I just thought, let's talk about it. Let's talk about how we respond when we feel like we're too much. And of course, we can have too muchness sitting alongside not enoughness as well. Those two things in that beautiful human way that we can carry a paradox to apparently opposing views held simultaneously. And there are many similarities actually with not enoughness. They both can make us feel as though we somehow don't fit. We don't fit in the world. We're not inhabiting the space that we've been allocated by whoever it is that, secretly allocates us our space. We're not fitting in that space. And I once saw a really wonderful TED talk, and if I can find it, I'll share the link actually, because she was kind of awesome. This woman from Scotland who was actually dressed in the most flamboyant, just astonishing outfit that completely went against all the rules, and was wonderful. And she talked about how so few of us actually inhabit the space that we've actually been given. So we can kind of have this sense that we've been allocated this space, and we shouldn't really take up too much room. It can be a male and a female sense, I think, that almost like we've sort of carried some stories with us that, not to get too big-headed about things, not to ask for too much, not to express our needs, not to be clear about what it is that we really want from our life, and only to be responding to what it is that we sense other people need and putting them before us. That there are so many themes and threads that run through this, interlinking themes and threads. But one of the things that this woman was saying is how important it is that we actually do really step into our space. And often what we call charisma is the thing that we notice about someone who truly is inhabiting all of the space that they can access. And, of course, we haven't been given a kind of set meterage of, if we can talk about energy in those terms, a set amount of space in the world. There is plenty of room for the whole of us. And one of the things that I have come to understand is how fundamentally important it is that we make room for the whole of us in our life. And that to me is tied in with this whole idea of being not enough or being too much. Because when we believe that we're too much, we can find ourselves actually rejecting parts of ourselves, pushing those parts out of sight in order that they don't take up more space than we feel we should, inverted commas, be taking up. And it's important that in this act of welcoming the whole of us, that we are able to do it in such a way that we are kind of grounded in the space that we inhabit. And fundamentally, this is all about belonging. So when we break down that word, we actually see that there are two parts to it. There's be and there's longing. And really, when we just flip them around, it's longing to be. That's what belonging really means. It's longing to be ourselves in the place where we are. Because when we are able to be fully ourselves, and that means taking up all of the space that we have capacity for, it means being able to show up with the whole of us and loving the whole of us and trusting that the whole of us is loved, then we feel like we belong. And of course, the act of belonging really begins inside us. Because while we feel that we are not enough, or while we feel that we are too much, we are basically saying either that there's something missing or that some part of us needs to go. So the choice of how we come to this place of belonging really sits inside of us. And I think, I just want to sort of take a pause there. I kind of rambled off, but I think there's something here about kind of just checking in with yourself. You know, does any of this resonate? This idea of not enoughness? You know, that's I know that's something that, you know, it's very common for people to feel, or this sense of being too much. You know, feeling as though we're kind of filling, even our skin is stretched too tight to hold the whole of us. And a big part of this, I think, is about how we perceive ourselves. So rather than seeing the world through the lens of what we believe other people see, we actually remove that lens from in front of our eyes and we start to see for ourselves. And that can help us identify what is going on for us if we do have this sense that we are too much. It can help us see, are we perceiving ourselves through someone else's eyes, through the lens that we have adopted from someone else? Or is there something, sort of asking for our attention that's sitting deep inside us, something that feels as though it has been rejected or unloved, and that part is sort of being, we're kind of carrying that part with us, but it feels like it's kind of extra. It's like it's too much because we haven't yet learned how to turn toward it with our most loving, compassionate heart. And And there's another aspect to this as well, which I think is around self-perception. Now, I've shared before in the podcast, particularly in kind of earlier episodes, about how I had a kind of distorted body imagery. And when I first began to think about this whole idea of feeling like I was too much, I started to wonder, is that was that because as a sort of young, middle kind of adolescent, I felt my body was bigger than it should have been. It didn't fit in what I thought was the, desired archetype of a teenage girl. So did this sense of being too much begin because I felt I was overweight? Or was that weight a manifestation of this feeling of being too much, and it Helen, I just need to rethink that thought. So was that feeling the manifestation of the feeling of being too much, almost like a way for me to see that this was what was going on inside of me? I know that's a bit of a complex sort of idea, and also, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of, people thinking that when we put on weight, it's because we think that we're too much and blah, blah, blah. But because there are so many reasons why we can find ourselves gaining weight at different stages in our lives, different points in our lives. But I just find it quite curious, that sense that physically, for me at least, I felt I was too much. And inside, I also felt I was too much. So what it meant was that even at the various points where I had lost weight, so there was a time when I was at university when I was very, very, very thin. And, at various points over the years, my body might have been less, but I still felt intrinsically that I was too much. And for me, and I think for others, certainly for other clients that I've worked with over the years, sometimes that sense of too muchness can lead to this body dysmorphia, and a sense that in order to deal with that, we need to be smaller. So this, what do we do? What do we do with this feeling too much? How do we address that? I think first of all is to kind of notice, is that something that resonates with you? Is that some of those sort of aspects that I've shared of my own story, do any of those click little buttons in your own neurons in your brain and fire little thoughts out? So first of all, we notice. And secondly, I think we come back to this idea that we all have the capacity, the opportunity to step fully into the space that we are given. And we are all given enough space. There is no such thing as being too much. Now, I suppose what then sort of comes for me is at times we can come across people who whose energy is so explosive, and And certainly, gosh, when I think back to some of the ways that I've behaved in the past, my energy has definitely been explosive. It's been like, look at me, almost like sort of demanding that attention. My mum used to call me Sarah Heartburn. I don't know if you, after the famous actress of the late 1800s, Sarah Bernhardt, because I'd get very kind of dramatic. But I think for me, that was an expression of this feeling like there was a lot going on inside me and I didn't know how to channel it. So it would come out in this kind of explosive, like attention demanding, attention seeking behavior. And we can see it in adults, we see it in children, we see it in adults, we see it in, people in the media. There is a kind of a distinction here, I think, between that kind of really kind of forcing our way out into the world, compared with, that sort of calm, awesome presence that some people just have when that they are fully grounded and holding themselves with love and compassion in the space that they take up. And even as I say that, gosh, my hands are really tingling as I kind of get this sense of like really holding ourselves. And so I think, like so much of the stuff that I cover on the podcast, it's really just an opportunity for reflection of like, how does it feel to really allow yourself to take up space, to really acknowledge like the full potential of yourself, to not feel as though you have to limit yourself in some way, out of some fear that someone, whoever that someone is going to think that you are too much. And often these stories of not enoughness, too muchness, they come from childhood. So also perhaps kind of looking back and seeing, well, what might have been the patterns or the stories, the narrative that set this in motion. For me, I'm fairly sure, I'm the youngest of four, and pretty much the only way to get the attention that I really wanted was to be quite a lot. And so, and another belief, I think I've shared this with you before, another belief that I hold is that I am annoying. And I suspect at times, as the youngest of four, I probably was a bit annoying. I kind of love that part of me now that believes that I'm annoying. But it's a very similar part to the I'm too much. They're very attached to each other, those two parts. So kind of looking back and seeing, well, where might this have begun? And looking back with compassion, with no judgment on our caregivers or on those that we were, influenced by. That one of my favourite phrases, most people most of the time are mostly doing their best, holds true most of the time. So looking back with compassion and without judgment, but just kind of seeing, okay, well, that could have influenced this for me. And then seeing, well, what does it feel like for me to really belong? And to remember that state of belonging is an internal state. We begin always with ourselves. And when we belong here, it becomes much easier to really step into the full space that we have available to us. And it's big, There's a lot of room. So we can step into it. Okay, my darlings, I really hope that made sense. I feel as though I went off into lots of thoughts, but gosh, even as I was talking, it felt useful for me. So I really hope it was useful for you too. And I send you a hug and a wave. Oh, and by the way, I've started getting the transcripts for these podcasts as well. So I'm not quite sure how to share them yet. But if anyone has got any thoughts, that would be really useful. The transcripts can be really useful. Okay. All right, my darlings. That was a bit random. I'll send you another hug and a wave.